Shabbat Shalom. I remember when I first met my wife's family, and they had a typical American Jewish background. Half the family had come from German Jews, Reformed German Jews in the 1800s, and the other half of the family had come in the early 20th century from Russia and Ukraine, like so many of us. And they had a very strong Jewish identity growing up, my wife and her sister. But most of their identity was centered around that feeling for the old country, not Brooklyn, but the old country, the shtetl culture, Yiddish, Eastern Europe, and that whole world. That whole world, of course, meets America and New York, and that culture that has become the prevalent culture here. And a lot of it, that feeling for life that was mostly disappeared in the Shoah, but still lives on among millions of American Jews, and how they eat and think and laugh, and all the many ways that American Jews echo some of that culture that came to them back from Eastern Europe. And I remember one of my early visits to my wife's family, she took me to a suburb of Washington, D.C., a very Jewish suburb, where her Hebrew tutor from her bat mitzvah ages lived there. It was far away from Bethesda. And her Hebrew tutor then was in her late 80s, or mid to late 80s, and was a Holocaust survivor. And I remember going to her house. You can imagine what it was like, a house full of a lifetime of memories, and her husband was also a survivor. And these two people had such an influence on my wife and her family. It was really a sense of giving over some of the essence of wisdom of another age, of who they were, what they represented, and that they communicated it to them at a certain point in their life, and a really large imprint on my wife's family. So I remember we met, I'm an Israeli Jew or something like that, and talking about Judaism at some point, and realizing for me, where my being was planted was somewhere in Eastern Europe too, but in other moments of Jewish history and of Jewish being. But for her and her sister, and it was really, that was it, the old country, the Eastern Europe, the shtetl. And as we read in this morning in our parsha, right, Moses' final prophetic words, and he says, Zechor yemot olam. He says, remember the days of old. Moses says, remember the days of old, the days of the world, literally. Our translation is, consider the years of age past. Ask your parent who will inform you, your elders who will tell you. And so Moses was telling the people in his guiding message before he was about to die, remember where you come from. Don't just live in your present. Don't just live with the circumstances of where you are right now. But remember the days of old, and that's one place where you can find a different wisdom that will add something to your life. Don't plant yourself only in the present, but also go back to your source. And I think many American Jews have had a similar experience to my wife in so many ways, of having a family member or a teacher or someone who conveyed some of that feeling of the tradition of where coming from, a different time, and a knowledge and wisdom that's hard to find in our world, in the air of our world. And then I think many of us feel an instinctive responsibility. We can't just let that go away, but we have to then teach it in some form or the other to our children and to our family members, and pass it on as best we can to the next generation. Stories and books and education and all of that. And I think probably it's what drives many of our religious school families to send their children to religious school. Remember the days of old, and the feeling of trying to give over a little bit of what they themselves received from religious school, but also the intangible, the treasure of those people in our lives who've given us a feeling for a different period. And they send their kids to religious school because the school can help give them some of that, make that past alive. Consider the years of age past. Ask your parents who will inform you, your elders who will tell you. So Ibn Ezra, the Spanish commentator, says, when it says the word avicha, ask your parents who will inform you, he says it's not really referring to your actual parents. He's saying it's referring to the ancient fathers, to the prophets and prophetesses of biblical times. And so as Jews, we have many different parts and periods of our history, of our communal consciousness in which we can draw strength and wisdom from. And so we have our prophetic tradition. We have the men and women who heard God's voice and spoke truth to society about taking care of the needy and the orphan and the widow, and who felt that God was not absent in some faraway heaven, but speaking to us right now and demanding of us to be present right now and alert and aware. And we can connect to that simple lives that they have, wandering the land of being completely devoted to their divine mission, the truth of biblical times, the subjects of biblical times. Or we can plant ourselves in the space of the rabbis of the Talmud and their age of intellectual ferment and creativity, where really the shtetl comes from. They were the creators of the small Jewish communities where tradition bound everybody together, and our culture of of intellectual achievement and of our deep humanity for people and all of their different needs and conditions and environments of life, and where they sharpened the Jewish sense of ethics and morals and of mind, and they had that angle of not turning and trying to cause trouble with the halls of power, whatever country we were living in, but to be inward dwelling and thinking of how to create communities of justice and truth within ourselves. The Talmudic minds and geniuses that did also contribute so much to humanity. And we also have the communities, and we have so many, but another to mention perhaps, or comes to mind, the poets of medieval Spain, a little slice of history where the Jews were suddenly doing well, as in America today, where Jews were integrated into the general society, represented in the highest levels of culture and of arts, and created a Jewish culture that was noble and majestic, and that even after the Jews were expelled from Spain, 500-600 years level, still held on that culture, the beautiful culture of Ladino and traditions and refinement, and a little slice of time when the Hebrew language was taken to new heights by the poets and Hebrew grammar was fine-tuned. And we're taught that the poets would give a Hebrew poem as a birthday present or as a wedding gift, and just an incredible age of ferment of nobles and poets and scientists and the Maimonides. And so when we read these words, Moses' words, Zechor Yemot Olam, remember the years of age past, this is what we're trying to remember. We're trying to think, where can we plant a part of our being in the past ages of our people? And from that place, draw out strength, draw out wisdom, draw out a different perspective, and feel the unique heart and culture and richness that is our inheritance as Jews. Shabbat Shalom.